My name is Joy Gilfilen. I am a civic scientist. I have a background in studying human potential. I've spent about 60 years of my life trying to figure out how humans work relative to how we make changes happen in the world. Because I went into politics, I went into the news media, I went into business, I went into many different things to figure out how we could change the world. And at one point when I was raising children, and before that, when I was pregnant, I realized that the world as I was told it worked didn't work the way I was experiencing it as a mother. So this is like a snapshot forward into 2022 after 13 years of working with the Restorative Community Coalition, trying to understand why we in America are incarcerating millions of people and why we're involved in wars all over the world and why humans have developed entire industries that are decimating our species. So this is one of the original images that I had drawn for me after I stopped at one point and said, how do we change the world? If I was one woman in Bellingham, a mother, just one person, the story is that one person can change the world. Is it true? And I stopped and I asked Mother Nature, and I'm not going to go into that whole story, but it was like an epiphany. It's like one of those days where you have they say it a come to Jesus meeting or whatever. Mine was I had to come to Mother Nature and I had to say, what is it that I can do as a mother? If I'm one mother and I don't know any, I'm not important. How am I going to change the world? And the universe came back and it talked to me and it showed me this image. So if you'll move to the next slide, I'm going to speak about what does this image actually reflect for me. It was a story of the fact that when I was a mother and I had a little baby growing in me, that baby basically took over my life. I mean, I had to listen to that baby as to what I was going to eat, when I was going to go to the bathroom, how I was going to sleep, whether or not I could drink coffee. And I realized that that little being inside of me was its own creature. And I started reading a book, and I can't remember the name of the book, but it was every week or every day even, what was happening to that little fetus that was growing inside of me. And how was I found out it was a little boy. And how was he growing through these different phases as he was building the different eight systems of the body? Like, how was his heart developing? How was his brain developing? How did his body, how did his two little cells that are represented in the center of this image, how do those two little cells become 27 trillion cells when I finally let him out to become another human being, to grow in the world, living and breathing in air instead of amniotic fluid or inside my uterus? Who was this little thing? He was in charge of himself. Over the next 9 months, I watched how he learned to see, how he learned to talk. Then over the next little while, how he learned to crawl around and then take form and be able to manage his body as he stood upright and then started to explore and walk and move around. And how he assessed when I left the room so that he could get into stuff, because he wanted to see more. He was an explorer on a new adventure. He couldn't understand my language. He understood my yell. If I yelled at him, if I barked, he understood. If I was happy, he understood. If I was sad, he probably could feel all kinds of things. I didn't know. I didn't know that my PMS, when I was a cranky mother, was going to impact his cellular memory. I did not know that if I was eating NutraSweet, which by the way, I learned not to eat before I got pregnant, but if I was eating NutraSweet, I was going to be building neurological trouble into his being. This entire process of being a mother changed the way that I saw the world work, how the world worked. As my little boy grew and got bigger, he learned to run around this circle like rings on a tree, just like a tree grows in bigger. he grew more and more cells in his body until at some point he ended up with 47 trillion cells, the scientists said. I don't know who counted it, but if he's 47 trillion cells and those cells are duplicating, those cells are under his control and his desires, and the food I'm giving him, I'm not telling him how to do it. Our business systems are not controlling that little body. And I realize that they're not controlling my body either unless I give them permission. My mother taught me this a long, long time ago, and I don't remember when she first told me. Of course I wouldn't. I was little. What she said was, no one controls your mind unless you give it to them. They can incarcerate your body. They can hold you down. They can do all kinds of things to you. But if you give them your mind, that's your choice. Control your mind. No one can control your mind unless you give them permission to control your mind. Now, she's Polish. My ancestors are from Poland. My grandparents came here. My mother was born here. My mother never talked about what happened in Poland because she was born here. But I never knew my grandparents because my mother left home when she was in 8th grade because of things that happened. So what I learned is that now, looking back on it 50 years, 60 years later, I've learned that I didn't know anything about what really happened in Germany. I don't know anything about what really happened in Poland. I really didn't know what was going on in the rest of the world. I knew what was going on in my little itty bitty world, controlled by the inputs given by my parents and my grandparents and that weren't there, and my family. And my influence was controlled by the Vietnam War by the time I was 13. It was controlled by the farmers and my 4-H clubs and my Grange Hall people when I was in middle school, and it was controlled by my sports teachers. It was then controlled by business, and it was controlled by politicians, and it was controlled by everybody else. And they were feeding me stuff. But the one thing that I'm very grateful on is when I was a little girl, I had nature to study. And I had my mother telling me, no one can control your mind unless you give it to them. And I had my father telling me, there's no right and wrong according to anybody else. The only person who ever knows what's right and wrong for you is you. And he said, in the world, there's 1 degree on this side, there's 1 degree on that side, there's the black and the white, and there's 98% of the space in between. And that's your choice. You get to choose. And the only one who will ever know what's right or wrong is you in any situation. And one of the things he told me when I left home as a young woman to go to college, he told me as I'm going down the street, driving away, he said, you know what? He says, I can't protect you anymore. And he said, if you ever have to kill somebody, you're the only one who can make the decision. And whoever is the attorney or the job or the law will never be able to tell you what's right or wrong. Only you will know. You have to protect yourself. And you have to live with the consequences because you are the only one who inhabits your body, and you're going to be making the decisions that you make for the rest of your life. And those 3 pieces of information from my parents allowed me to go out in the world and start to change my world. So let's change the slide. So there was a point at which I had to make a decision as to why was the world so crazy and creating the fear and this destruction in the world. And when I was in my 20s, I started looking at what is the human potential? What is true about all these different, the psycho-cybernetics, all the training that happened in my high school, all the things that they were talking to you about meditation, or they were talking to you about Jesus, or they were talking to you about the physiology, how your body works, how to take meds, whether you should do drugs or not, whether you should take LSD, or whether, is it really a consciousness raising? And how does nature actually work? I was trying to integrate all these different things. And so over time, what I've come up with is a series of philosophies called the intentional change philosophies. If you can change the slide. I developed a model after I was watching what was going on with my little boys, and I was watching what was happening to my little boys in the marketplace compared to the other little boys in the school. I was actually fortunate. I had built a business that was making, I was doing $3.5 million in sales selling organic foods to hippies as a business opportunity. I was selling algae to hippies actually as a business opportunity before vitamin C was popular. And what I learned is that all the other little boys and girls in the school didn't have the benefits of my food, my organic food. And so when I had that meltdown, when I said, how is the world going to work when my sons aren't going to have the future I'm going to have? How is the world working as the economy is shifting, as the medical model was taking over, as all these little kids in school was taking Ritalin? I went home one day and I said, if I'm a mom, if I'm supposed to be one of the leaders of the future, what can one mom do to change the world? And I lay down on the ground and I'm banging on it. Said, what could I do? Because I don't want my little boys to get sick and die and fall into all this stuff. And the universe came back and said, you have to understand that the world works just like our systems work. Our world works on a pattern called change. Everything in the world changes 365 days a year, 24 hours a day. Everything changes. The only thing in the world that is constant is change. You have to build a system that is based on change. And this was the model I built, because I went back and I said, how does nature work when humans aren't messing with it? How the world works on this image is the universal pattern of living forces. The image works that everything in the world, everything in the universe is in a constant state of degeneration and regeneration. And in the middle is generation, the desire of life to live, the desire of life to explore. It's interesting today that if you listen to the people who study, quantum physics, or the people who understand protons and photons, and the people who understand the power of positive thinking, people are talking about this, but really at a very primal level, I realized that your desire to love, your desire to explore, your desire to be in love, or your desire to love is the controlling energy of your life. If you desire to be afraid, you can be afraid, but it's going to come back and bite you on the backside. I learned when I was a kid on the farm that if I was working with wild animals or with a big horse or my bull or any of these animals, I learned that if I allowed fear to control my body, I would invariably get hurt, because the horse is bigger than me. But if I'm afraid of him, he's going to sense it and then he's going to act out. And if you go into communities today, there's animals as natural therapy is one of the therapy groups in Bellingham that actually helps people who have problems with anger and upset. They take them to the animals as natural therapy group because the animals sense your feeling. And guess what? We humans are just animals. So we all work on either desire to create what we want or fear, and we create the damage. Either way, we're still in charge because of our mind. That's what my mother was taught. If you don't give other people or other things power to control your mind, you stay in possession of your soul. So the whole point of this is there's intangible living forces that are coming in, you attract them. There are tangible, touchable, physical forces in your life that eventually go away as seasons move and as times change. Does anybody have questions about this particular slide while I'm on it? Was I clear enough in that? I'll keep moving, because the thing that's funny is that when I started looking at that process of change, if you could back up to the past slide for just a second, I realized that at the very bottom, the degeneration, the generation, and the regeneration, I started looking at the question of whether whether things were fixed and solid or whether things were changing. What is the truth about change? Our body is not a fixed thing. Remember when we were kids, a lot of times your parents would tell you, eat good carrots because you'll get good eyesight. You know, they said, eat this and you'd be this. And I had this feeling that my body was this fixed thing. By the time I had a baby, and by the time I was studying organic nutrition, I realized that my body is changing all the time. Every single thing that I ate 7 or 10 years ago is what my body is composed of, or it's already gone down the toilet and it is waste and I've consumed it. So my current body is made up of what I ate just recently. I eat foods, I drink water, I breathe the air. That is what my body is composed of. So my body is regenerating all the time. And there are bugs in my body that help me to decay. That's not for me to be afraid of. If I didn't have bugs in my body helping me to excrete waste, I would die. So there's an actual living rhythm to my life. So go ahead to the next slide. So it made me less afraid of death because I then realized that we're all dying and we got a whole bunch of life to live. So I'm busy right now creating my future body and creating my future life. And that's key. So the decaying cycle is naturally deconstructive and it becomes compost. The creative desire of my body to live and experience into life, into the future, is my life force in motion. And the only thing I can control right now is now, as far as what my actions are. But my future is completely in my provision for how I create the future. Create another slide. Then I started working with my sons in high school. And this was right after the turn of the century, actually, in 2008, 9, that period of time, my sons were graduating from high school. And I started coaching the kids right after, right in the middle of when 9/11 happened and the world started to just went into this massive fear overdrive system. Technology hit, future shock hit. We went from more of a agriculture and industrial age society to a high-tech age society. Everything in my life was shifting. And I'll tell you what, the boys were dealing with mass media. They were dealing with fear on steroids. They were dealing with so much coming across the media, and they were watching video games. They were watching all these things happening in the world around them, and they couldn't even slow down. And as a coach and as a parent of sons, the amount of chaos that they were dealing with is horrific. So one of the things that, as I was watching the boys, I was also sitting in the gym watching all the parents. And I was also watching the internet as I was trading stock options, because I was curious as to what was happening in the marketplace with the meltdown. And I was watching what was happening with political elections. And I was watching how the kids' parents were often all talking about drinking and parties and all this stuff, and they were checking out when their kids were dealing with real world problems. And I was talking to the boys because I was driving a lot of them around to school. I had 8 to 10 kids at any given time living basically at my house, because a lot of the children that I was coaching were living in with no parents, or in broken households. And so I had all these kids, these boys coming and going, and they're the cream of the crop kids, according to the sports. Like, they're varsity athletes. And they didn't have very many dads around that were really solid citizen dads. There were a lot of broken families. The mothers were trying to keep pieces together. There was a lot of conflict in the social world. And I was watching as the kids were graduating and going through high school that a lot of them were getting arrested. Now, as a girl growing up in my high school period, There were kids that would do, drag racing and stuff like that, but the arrest rate was not nearly so big.
It's 2:00.
The impact on these children was enormous. So I'm watching all these cycles and I'm observing and I'm going, you know what? How am I going to help these kids make it through life? How am I going to help them go from high school to college? If I'm a leader again, how am I going to help these kids re-enter a society that I know, as Alona just spoke a little bit ago, our economy has dramatically shifted in the 70s and 80s, and now it's 2000. My business had flipped upside down. I used to get an 80% close rate. Suddenly I was at a 20% close rate in my business. So I was very concerned about how to help these kids. And at one point I asked my son, I said, look, everybody's drinking, smoking pot, playing video games. You're all doing all this stuff. You're not going to make it into the marketplace. And I'm not telling on my kids. I'm talking about us as a society, all this whole community. People are doing all this stuff. How are you going to make it into the new world? And because I don't know how to help. I can do what I can do. I can feed you good food. I can coach you. I can take you to the games. I can do these things, but I can't help you when you're not under my control. You guys are going to have to sink or swim. What can I do to help? And I did a movie. It's in the Intentional Change Network thing. It's also on my Joy Talk. Joy Gilfilen, host of Joy Talk radio or YouTube channel. You can watch it. It's called Flipping the Joy Switch. I did a movie about this because I realized that he needed something simple to navigate by. He actually told me, he says, our world is changing so fast, Mom. He said, I need an image because kids think in hieroglyphics these days. I need one thing to do, and I need a clear path so that I can help myself make decisions when the world's in chaos. And I said, okay, son, really? How am I going to put 50 years of knowledge into one image, one picture, one thing to do? And he said, well, figure it out, because I don't know how to do it. And if anybody can, you could. So I did it. And what I thought is that most people are dealing with so much fear mongering in their world that it's overwhelming us. We shut out. We go into the fight or flight. A lot of people just think that there's those two things. Third one is paralysis, fight, flight, or freeze. When we go into paralysis, we don't know what to do. So what do? We go, the pattern, as we've already seen in some of our slides, is we drink, we go into denial, we avoid, we get busy with sports, we become competitive, we do whatever can distract us from what's actually going on in the world. And our world has been enormously distracted for the last while. So what I learned is that one of the biggest stories that's out there is the persecutor victim rescuer story. Can you flip the slides up? Because I think it goes into this story. There's a story trap that is out there that tells you that you can't, that you have to control your thoughts. And I found a coach. The woman was a gymnastics coach. And she said, you can't control your thoughts. Your thoughts happen. That's like a mistake. What you can do is control the emotion that's associated with the thought. You can choose to control your emotional interpretation of anything that happens to you. This woman is called Nola Ayers. She was a gymnastics coach at Seahome High School. And she had a 384 win to 1 loss coaching record in gymnastics. Winningest gymnastics coach in American history, 384 wins to 1 loss, 20 years coaching high school gymnastics. She wasn't breeding gymnasts. She was growing them. And so I called her up and I said, what is it that you do that's different than all these other coaches? Because you're coaching a whole bunch of individual people. What do you do? And she said, I teach the people, my students, that they can't control their thoughts, but they can control their interpretation of thoughts. So in the second that something happens like that, like a bang happens or a thought comes in, you have a 7-second window where you can change your interpretation of the thought. Is it a fearful thought? Is it a joyful thought? Is it a curiosity thought? You can control the labeling of your thought instantly, as soon as it happens. And that's your interception point. That's the point where you can pivot how your body chemistry is going to react as it's going down through its system. You are a sensory awareness system. Your body is energy in motion, walking around in a big bag of water. And your bag of water has an electromagnetic charge that is going through it, because you're all salt water, right? When I started to compare how the world works as a planet, it's 98% water. And within the water, there's only a small amount of fresh water, and there's only a certain amount of fresh water and a whole pile of salt water. When I started looking at the laws of proportionality and I started to compare it, I went, oh my God, my dad told me that there was only 1 degree black and 1 degree light. The earth rotates, there's only so much darkness. There's a point of when the darkness becomes light, and then there's a point in the morning where the darkness becomes light again. All the rest of that time in between is 98% gray. It's just stuff in motion. Everything is stuff in motion. I can control the catecholamine response in my body. So let's move to the next slide. This was the key that Nola taught me to teach the people around me, is to learn to control their fear, because that was the second thing I said. What is it that you do? She teaches her students to control their emotional interpretation of what happens to them. And when I asked her about this, I said, so how does what you're teaching your students apply to the world? And she said, fear. It's the #1 problem that people have. When you are in fear, you make mistakes. When you can get out of fear, you can have responses and you can control the conditioning. And the biggest problem we have in the world is fear. And I started examining fear, and I went, false. A lot of people would teach it's false evidence appearing real. It's not false, it's fabricated. The difference between real life fear is real life fear motivates you to get off your butt and get out of the way if a truck's coming at you. When my bull was getting restive, I learned to control my fear. So I was breathing, I stayed calm, I changed my energy so that he wouldn't respond to my natural fear. So I learned to control my emotional fear. In this world, when my son was growing up, in the aftermath of 9/11, as we were going into all these war games, after the world was going into chaos, he's bombarded by fabricated evidence appearing real every single day. All of us are going through it now. Fabricated emotions appearing real, fabricated economics appearing real, fabricated ecosystems appearing real. We live inside 4 square walls in concrete buildings with glass walls and pretend we're alive. No, we're living inside a fabricated box. We have fabricated empires. We have fabricated elders. We think that our elders, our smartest people, are the guys who made the most money last year. No, they might be the ones who spent the most money last year, but we don't know the difference. And we listen to our elders in America, and I'm speaking specifically in America, but in many of our cultures, we have replaced our honest, genuine, living elders who are living in the real world. We've replaced them with people who have privilege, prestige, or power. Move the slide. But that fear pattern is a pattern of repetitive oppression. And I was trying to figure out how the oppression came about, and if we're dealing with all this fabricated fear, how we're going to deal with it. So when I was working with Doug Banner, he's a master storyteller from Bellingham. What he did is he talked to me about the drama triangle. And the thing that's funny is I knew about the drama triangle because guess what? I was taught it in the 1970s in high school. Okay, psycho-cybernetics, and it was all about, and I remember fighting with my teacher actually in high school. He was a teacher. I was like a freshman or a sophomore or something. And he was teaching this in one of my classes, and he said, it doesn't matter what you say. And I raised my hand and I said, it totally matters what you say. And he said, no, it matters. And he went off on some other story around the drama thing. And I said, you know what? I'm disagreeing with you. One smile can change a life. One word can change a life. And he said, no, it can't. And I argued with him. And I said, here's the truth. If I'm in my locker, down at my locker, and some kid comes by and he's having a bad day, and I smile at him as he walks by, I could have just stopped a suicide. I'll tell you what, that teacher shut up, because it's true. It's true. When we give love to other people, when we smile at them, if they're at a decision point in life. Now, I'm not saying that everything that happens in the world is because you said the wrong word or you made the wrong smile or whatever you did. I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the fact that we all have a circle of influence, and we influence every single thing in the world around us, and the world around us influences us. Because why? We are a living body in a sea of living universe. We are all infecting each other with our love, our electromagnetic force field, our power. Think about it. When you walk into a party, if you're angry and you're upset, you will infect everybody in that party with anger and fear. If you walk into that party and you're happy and you're laughing and things are going well, the whole party can change. If you walk into a household where everybody is angry and you've got an abusive father or an abusive mother, or you've got somebody who's tripping out, you can infect that entire family with more chaos if you add to it. And that's what's happening in our community. Our communities are being led by leaders who play in the drama triangle, the good guy, bad guy, victim story. We turn it into movies and media and marketing, and we sell the story trap. We get caught in the story trap of who's the good guy, who's the bad guy, and who's the victim. And we forget that in that drama triangle, guess who is the victim in most of those stories? All the collateral damage, the people who are watching the game, the people who are sitting aside, pretending it ain't happening, or pretending that good guy, bad guy, victim story is just about the good and the bad guy. It's about every single one of us who is standing outside that circle, who is allowing the good guy or the bad guy to be played by who's ever above the circle. That's what we're not paying attention to. Who made the movie? Who made the news media? Who created the economy? Who created any of this? We have choice. That drama triangle, that hyper reactive behavior that we have in our community, is created by somebody that didn't even know what they were doing before today. And I'm reacting to today. So tomorrow, when I start talking about the Doctrine of Discoveries, when I start talking about the influence that these people that we put up as elders, as our ancestors, as our territorial godfathers, as our priests, our popes, our queens, our kings, our leaders of the past, they made decisions that caused a ripple effect. They created institutional habits. They created behaviors. They created entire systems that today we're still following because they said so. Now, I'm not talking and I'm not insulting the ancestral energy that is inside our natural being. We each are two cells. We were made by our parents. Our parents were 4 cells. before they became 27 trillion or 47 trillion each, whatever science says now. Okay, our bodies are hybrids. We both accelerate and we decelerate. We compose and decompose. We grow. Everything in the world around us is growing and contracting and becoming more. It's a moving universe. So when the papal bulls were written way back then by a maladaptive person in charge of entire empire, he wrote words and he put them on a piece of paper. For those of you who don't know about the Doctrine of Discoveries, I recommend you go look on YouTube. You go look. A friend of mine, Paul McGee, is going to be on here tomorrow or the next day, I think tomorrow morning. And he's going to talk about his study of thousands of years of history. He goes clear back before civilization, clear back to when we were still, you know, humans in primarily an agrarian, and before that, a hunter-gatherer society. And he talks about the rhythms and flows of civilization and life across continents. I'd never thought about that before. I'm really glad I took his course. He does an entire series on the Doctrine of Discoveries. But before I met him, I also met Steve Newcomb. He wrote a book called Pagans in the Promised Land. When he wrote that book, he also did a little movie. It's up online. You can find it. It's a little tiny short movie. It's about the Doctrine of Discoveries. And he talks about when the papal bull, that first papal bull was written, it was a piece of paper or a piece of parchment or whatever it was they had back then. And he wrote it out and it said, he told the king, he said, hey, Mr. King, and I'm not talking Martin Luther King. I'm saying this is, you know, way back then. He wrote this document and he wrote on it and he said, Mr. King, if you get admirals and ships captains and they go off seafaring, we want land, resources, and people. And if you bring those people back to us and you take all the land and you take all the resources in my name and you plant your flag, my flag on your land, then you get all the kingdom of heaven. You're going to be a big guy. You're going to be, you're forgiven. So that piece of paper, that parchment, got sealed and it got sent off to the king, and the king got all his admirals together and he sent them off on ships, and they came and settled the entire eastern seaboard of the Americas. And they went into Africa and they created these patterns. And today we fight about it as if it's a legal problem. Well, it is a legal problem, because guess what happened to that little papal bull? When they set it up, it then migrated. Guess what? The world's in constant state of change, right? So that little document ended up infiltrating the attitudes, the minds, the beliefs, and the behaviors of all these humans that were fighting over territory, trying to survive in a world that we didn't even understand really was floating around at high speed in the universe at thousands and billions of, however, what speed we're going. I can't even remember the numbers, but we're rotating at this massive rate of speed around the world. Our bodies are spinning as little tiny universes. Our cells are spinning as little tiny universes, and we still pretend that these guys that wrote that thing way back then were right. Baloney. But you know what it did? It created a ripple effect. It founded our institutions, it founded our systems, it founded our economies. We now have canon law, admiralty, common law, all this stuff. And then we spend our lives fighting over all this stuff, and we are killing millions of people across this planet. We can change our history, we can change our habits, and we can change our hubris. Hubris is arrogance. Our systems of the past are not real. They are not nature at work. They were not based on love. They were based on abusive people who were maladaptive in the first place, who wanted to own territory, land, people, and they wanted to turn it into an economy. They may not have even known what they were building. They were hundreds of years ago. I don't know what they were thinking. What I know is that the side effect today is that our Supreme Court has been validated as being based upon the doctrine of discovery. How sick is that? And it has led to the creating of genocide all over this world. Genocide of all kinds of people who are not like them, whatever them is. And the sadness is that we are continuing to hurt each other, and we are continuing to make stories, and we're continuing to make movies about heroes who kill people, and then they fall apart because guess what? It is not natural for humans to kill each other. That is totally contrary to our nature. I mean, why do we have a baby that is going to have to suckle for 9 months or 2 years? Why do we do that? If we're designed to kill people, why are we not doing it then? No, we're designed to love. We're designed to nourish. We're designed to take care of each other. Our natural inclination, you watch any babies, you watch any children, they immediately go over when somebody gets hurt and they want to help. Fighting is not natural. It is not normal. It is a conditioned behavior trained by people who were teaching the wrong things hundreds of years ago, and we just duplicate it. Change the pattern, change the habit, change the history, change the stories. It's crazy that we have people who say, how come those high school kids are shooting kids in elementary school? Why do we have violence in the street? Because we teach violence from the pulpit. We teach violence from our law enforcement systems. We teach violence from our school teachers. We teach violence in our movies. We teach violence in all of our media. We can change the story. Please change the slide. I'll show you why. And I'll show you how it happened, because this virus is killing us. This is I'm going to call it the virus violence, or the violence virus, I guess. So the violence is that we have an original wound. Okay, I'm going to breathe for a minute and slow down. Let you just absorb this image. I need to take a breath of a glass of water. I can't take a glass of water. I can take a sip of water. My cells need water. And what's funny is my neck doesn't leak. It has a hole in it though. Though my mouth opens, I put water in it and the water goes down my, if I was a chicken, I'd call it a gullet. It's my esophagus. so we've laid anyway, the water goes down and it nourishes my cells and then I feel better. That's one of the techniques I teach when I'm talking flipping the joy switch. I teach people to breathe and drink water. So breathe. Everybody on the call, just breathe for a minute. Because I'm going to add one thing to the front of this slide. It's a triangular slide because it's easy for people to comprehend what happens in the physical, because we know what happens in the physical when violence happens. We know what that means. But before the violence is the hidden thing that's over there in the dark on the left. And then there's a hidden ripple effect that happens on the right. The hidden thing that happens on the left is we have a predisposed orientation. We were taught, or we thought, or we felt we are reactive or we're responsive in the first place. We have preconditioning that happens in the dark of before. And that's a wounding, it's a trauma, it's a joy, it's whatever it is, whatever the filter is, the blocks are what's happening. And then as we're the thing coming in from the, I'm going to say from the left side of the direct violence triangle, there's something that happens. This is that sound or the voice or the thing that happens, or the accident or the police or a siren or a war. This is the thing that happens that is the direct violence. And I'm not going to go to the next slide first, but that violence becomes a wound and it becomes a hurt. So that's the emotional impact of direct violence. Then what happens is people get afraid of the violence and this thing goes to the left and it creates a structural violence. People don't want to react. They don't want to have that happen again. We create structural violence. We create protection. We create, what do we do to a little kid? They fall off the tree. They skin their knee. They're crying. What do? We pick them up. Okay, we love them first, but they would say, oh, don't climb that tree, you're going to get hurt. Well, how stupid is this? Kids are going to climb trees. Kids are going to climb trees. The smartest thing to do is say, oh, I'm so sorry. How does it hurt? What's going on? And listen to them, let them cry and say, you know what? Why don't I teach you how to climb that tree better? So you go over and you apply that, you teach the child how to explore safer. But many of us will pick the child up and we'll run him over to here and we'll take him away, or we take him to the doctor. We do whatever it is because we want to protect them, because that's what we were taught to do. On the farm, you know what my dad had to teach me? What my mom had to teach me? You're out in the woods by yourself. You're stupid enough to crawl across that log that's going to break and you get hurt. Nobody's here to save you. You're going to have to figure out how to get home. Okay, now I'm not saying this is just to give a range of learning. It's not to say you should tell every kid that's 8 years old to go out of the house and go figure it out on the streets. That's not very smart, right? That's just as stupid as the other one. But you need to learn to be aware of what's going on, teach people to empower themselves, get strong. We don't build, if we've got people who are hurting in the streets in poverty, why in the world do we pass more laws to make them have to pay for more fines if they don't have the money in the first place? This is stupid. But this is what our institutions are doing. So I'm going to get off my rant because I said I was going to be quick. Oh, over here, there's structural violence. We create institutions, we create educational systems, we create things to control people because we are afraid they're going to get hurt. Well, then what happens is the cultural comes in the backside, and what we say, well, you wouldn't be making all those mistakes if you weren't Black, or if you weren't, Asian, or if you weren't this or that. And we create this whole cultural war around morals and race and class and caste, and it creates a real nightmare. And so we go around and around and around this model, and out the right hand side, remember in the dark I was telling you over there on the right, you can't see, it's the emotional impact on your children, on your grandchildren, on your great grandchildren. You're not seeing the impact on the government or on the environment and on the species and all these other things. So you're moving from non-physical past through this cycle of repetitive violence that we're amping up with the media, and then you spit them out on the right hand side and we got damage. Flip this, move the screen. PowerPoint. So what I then, over the last 13 years, as I've been studying the mass incarceration industry as it's working in the real world in Bellingham, it's one thing to have an opinion. It's another thing to do the test. It's another thing to learn to study how it works. And it's a whole other ball game to change the game, which is what I've been working on for 13 years because of Irene Morgan and the Restorative Community Coalition. Because I started studying the facts and the behaviors and the patterns, and I started working with real humans. Because you know what? That behavior, attitude, contradictions, that drama triangle that is on the prior slide becomes the violence triangle, like the Emperor and Darth Vader thing. The trauma becomes trauma, and it repeats. The wounding, direct wounding, triggers structural wounds, which triggers cultural wounds, which triggers a war between things, and we start label and we start fighting between one and the other, and it just keeps going, and it doesn't stop because we never stop and breathe and drink a glass of water and say, how could we do it different? What if it wasn't true? Because today what we've actually created, and this made me really sad to see it, but there are good things that have come out of this last 2 years of deep, deep, deep trauma. Now you got to look for it because it's not funny. You got to look for it. But what I discovered is there's a psychosis that is driving that Galton's conflict triangle, that violence triangle. Narcissism, psychopathy, and Machiavellianism are the behavior patterns of leaders who get out of control. Whether you're a leader of an empire, or you're the leader of the gang, the gangs that are running the bottom end of our society, the gangs that are running at the top, it's no different. You're just disconnected from your heart. You're disconnected from nature. You're disconnected from nature, and you're living with a broken heart. And in the center of that broken heart is a big black hole, a cellular vacancy. And these patterns repeat themselves. And remember at the beginning, I said it's about the patterns. Everything is about patterns. Once you see the pattern, you can change the pattern. But until you acknowledge that there is a pattern and you look at the pattern to change it, you can't change it. But the domination patterns are in reality what's killing our so many species on the planet. It's genociding millions of people all over the place. Our war games and our economy is hurting. So the good news is you can change the game. The imperial forces actually have more power than we think. We can change what is imperial in our hearts. We can change what controls our reactions and our behaviors. We can change our establishment. Flip the chart. When you start looking at the real patterns, you can see the conflict theory at work. The yellow, and I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. You can just grok it. The yellow is the behavior patterns that you can see the results of in our society. The stuff on the left and the right, the triggers and the proximate causes, that's the stuff that's hidden in the dark that we're not looking at. Because while our county has been chasing the idea of wanting to build a jail, guess what's happened? Our county got over $100 million in federal funding to be able to, as corporations, because we were under an emergency provision period, we got $100 million coming in, flooding the corporations that are running our government and our establishment institutions. Us little tiny guys like the Restorative Community Coalition, we haven't got funding. We haven't been asked to help. We haven't been supported. We've been marginalized. Homes Now, Bridges to Services, all of these little tiny SONs, Serenity Outreach Services, all the little nonprofits that don't fit in the imperial system don't get funded. And there is the opportunity. There's the liability, there's the risk, there's the problem, but this is also the opportunity. We have an opportunity to change the way we do business in this community. We have the opportunity to change the way we support government, the way we support businesses that have all the contracts. Flip the chart, please. We can actually draw a path out of here, because if you can understand the path down that feeds into fear, you can actually pivot in the present moment with courage to choose to take different actions to move towards joy. And I don't mean me. I mean the joy energy that's inside of us that has the courage to change how we construct and compose and regenerate our community. Because you know what's happening in Whatcom County? We have some of the most extraordinary resources. We have extraordinary leaders. We have extraordinary people with brilliant ideas, and they want to come forward, and we can take us out of here. But we have to reorganize how we think. Flip the chart, please. We have the ability to work and change our hats. Instead of being a persecutor and fighting with people, we can say, okay, what is the opposite of being a persecutor? Somebody who breaks things. They're the people who build. You put the role of the builder on. You literally change your cowboy hat to a construction hat, or your whatever kind of hat you got. As a rescuer, you change your job description, your role, and you become the innovator. How could it work if it worked good? If you were the victim, stop victimizing, start blaming yourself and everybody else. And I don't mean, there's a victimhood mentality, but the victimhood mentality has a lot of different faces on it. Start looking at who else is being hurt and look for who are the leaders. This is where leadership is born. Leadership has become gamesmanship. It became contractorship. It's become all these other ships. Admiralty law is a ship. Okay, we can change our ship You take victims, you find leaders, you find resources, you find allies, and you team up and you start building, leading, and innovating a new reality. Forget the government, forget these guys, forget law enforcement rules and regulations that all follow the past. I'm not saying you go out and fight with them. I'm saying you just recognize that they're living in a system. We can choose to change our systems, and that's what I'm here about. And these are things that I figured out are doable. You know why? Flip the chart. You know why? It's because I have learned that with the power of intentional change, you can change the set point. In the middle of this power, we've got a power, privilege, prestige triangle. That's the same as the body, mind, spirit triangle. If you live into fear, look at what's happening in your system. Is it a predator? Who is being predatory? Who's being the profiteer? And who's being the parasite? If you want to be regenerative, you look at what can you provide, what can you produce, and what can you protect? How can you actually be productive in your community? Change the slide, please. If we look at our systems, I've analyzed it. I ran for sheriff. I ran for Whatcom County executive. I ran a political campaign because I was diagramming how the system works and how to take it apart and how to rebuild it. We don't have to tear apart all the systems. We just have to redirect the systems, reorient the rules, change the establishment, change our behavior, and start looking at how do we do things humanely? What is the real value of currency? It's the energy between us. It's not money. Money is simply a symbol that we created and put power on, but it's the currency. It's my energetic power coming to you through the internet right here, right now. I have currency, emotional currency, energy in motion through space and time. We can affect each other. We can stop deceiving and creating tangle and chaos on the left-hand side. We can start innovating and inventing and nourishing. We can do all these things. More to come on another slide, another day. But all of these things are just placeholders for how we can change. Move the slide. The thing is that what we have to, though, realize is that hidden in the dark on either side of those triangles is the thing that's got us bound up. We have to recognize that our systems are constipated and our bodies and our systems are cracking under the stress. We're getting sick. Disease is that. It's the dis-ease. It's a disease of our societal system. It's a disease of our emotional intelligence. It's what's binding us up and causing us to crack. We have an overcast system, which is, Ilona just talked about it, the top institutions that are running a false fabricated economy. We then have the middle class. That's the middle caste system. It's not a class. We think we allow them to control us because classes are about who owns the money, who owns the power, who owns the privilege. Caste is who has us cast in stone and is controlling us. We can break the caste. We can break the caste on all these things. The undercast are the people who are living below the ecological system, who have been labeled heathens or slaves or victims, and they've been criminalized and put in the prison and industrial complex. Change the slide. I'll show you how this actually works, and we're not going to go into a lot of depth because I'm running out of time here. But what we have is an inflamed system. The osis on the end of any disease is inflammation. That's all it is. We got gaps. And the reason we have gaps is because we've been fractured by technology. We've been fractured by hundreds of years of belief systems. We've been fractured by wars and by this COVID crisis and the emergency declarations and the giving up of our power to other people. That gaposis has created that upper elite that runs the banking and finance system and is creating this false economy up here, the fabricated economic thing that we think is real that's just isn't. Then we have the economic civic war that we get busy with. My brother one time told me, he said, let me see if I can remember it. If you can be busy about what the people of the no, if you can take leisurely what the people of the world are busy about, then you can be busy about what the people of the world take leisurely. Think about that for a minute. If you can take leisurely what the people of the world are busy about, then you can be busy about what the people of the world take leisurely. So for the past 2 years, as president of the coalition, I've been pretty quiet because I was diagramming. I was studying how the economic civic war, that is the war between the landed billionaires, the ones who owned all the real estate, the power, and the cloud billionaires who own all the intellectual power, intellectual property, how these guys are at war with each other in the physical space. Look at all the news, look at all the media, look at where everybody's talking about where the power is. In the institutional, educational, generational gaps, we do have real gaps and they're fracturing us. Future shock has had a real impact on our entire generations. Technology has changed everything about how the world works. Artificial intelligence has it's taken over so many things. I mean, I can go to bed at night and I can say, hey, Alexa, turn on classical music, and it'll do it. I mean, what's up with that? I'm not saying maybe I like it, maybe I don't like it. I'm just saying it's there. It never used to be there. So the media wars and the stories that we get caught in these story traps are the things that we need to start to understand. Those are inflaming the situation and they're distracting me from paying attention to what's really going on in my family and in my life. Commercialism versus consumerism versus corporatism. That's the big game that the corporations are fighting over. This is why we're in a political nightmare. And underneath it, in between all these games that we're playing, is the uncivil civic war where we're playing politics and people are getting really hurt. We are genociding entire groups in our community. And it's not just the indigenous people who have been genocided. They were big. I didn't even realize how many millions of Americans, original Americans, the original species that lived in this country. I printed out just this morning, actually, I woke up and I got thinking about it after yesterday's conversations. And I started to print out all the wars that America has been involved in since its original founding in the 1700s. Or whatever year 1776, whatever that period of time was. It was that period of time. And I looked it up on Google and I said, how many wars have we been in America? And oh my God, I printed out 20 pages of just line items. It's incredible. And then I looked up and I went, okay, how many indigenous wars? What's happened to the indigenous people? I was stunned. And I started looking at how many battles have been fought in America, just in the United States. I wasn't even looking at Canada and Mexico. I wasn't even looking at what's happened in Africa. I mean, the lists are horrific. And there's civic wars over culture, class, racism, slavery. Who owns the human? And when you own the human, who can trade the human for more money? It's a trading game. It's an economic system. And it all came from one dude way back when who was known to be a crazy person. But he wrote it down in a document. And he put the document to work with military people and a king and the Vatican, the people who were in charge of Catholicism at the time. And he made it a religious war. It turned the whole world into religious wars. It turned the whole world into economic wars, and it turned the whole world into guys with guns killing each other. And the mothers and the fathers and the history, we hurt. Today we hurt. All of us hurt. And we hurt on a cellular level that is so painful, we don't want to talk about it. Let's just cover it up and pretend it ain't happening. Let's just put some more money out and build band-aids of buildings that can pretend to cover up the hurt. And let's hire people to guard those buildings as if that's going to protect us. It's not. Our world is hurting. Our humans are hurting. And the pain that we're causing is just getting worse. So flip the switch, because the good news is, this may sound dismal. I didn't do this because I was looking for pain and misery. I was looking for, how do we change it? And we either change by default or by intention. I choose intention because it's far more fun, believe it or not. Yes, I'm passionate here, and people say, God, Joy, look, lighten up. I'm not lightening up, because you know what? We can change this world. We are living beings in a living world, and what we do matters to the world around us. And I mean that. And that's why I'm excited to work with the Intentional Change Network. That's why I'm excited to find people who are innovators and change agents from around the world who can help us pioneer change. No, do we have a beautiful pattern? Do I have all the answers? No, but I got all the questions. Who are you? Move to the next slide, please. Who are you? What do you think? What do you believe in? Before we followed the leaders who did not have the knowledge or experience we have today. We got billions of bits of knowledge. The amount of knowledge that's changing in the world every second. I mean, my God, the numbers are moving so fast. It's extraordinary. We have new knowledge. We have wisdom. We know how we can pivot. We got coaches all over this world who can coach high performance athletes to perform. Why can't we teach high performance people to become the best leaders we can be? And we can share our knowledge. We can share our experiences. We can take actions that matter. What action would you want to take if you could? I am the founder of the Intentional Change Network inside the Noble Goldman platform. One of our top leaders, I believe, in the world is Mark. He's going to help us redesign these technology systems the best he can. And it's going to take some time. It's not going to take a lot of time, because you know what? 1%, 1 degree, 1 circle of influence can matter. We can help each other make these changes, and we can do it in pods, in groups, in teams. We're doing it through the Restorative Community Coalition. And with that, I'm going to end my segment of the recording of this call, because you know what? We have the potential here. We've got things we can do in Whatcom County, in your city and your town. Karen's in San Francisco or at San Antonio. Everybody can do different things in your city. You got to choose it. You got to want it. You got to ask for it. You got to help. Open the conversations. That's what we're doing here. We got another one at 3 o'clock. I got 13 minutes. Take a break. You got 13 minutes. I'm going to open the conversation, ask for feedback. Here we go. Mark, do you want to say something? I know you got to go pretty quick. So I don't know if I already overreached you, but speak up.
Oh, thank you, Joy. No, actually, I have a few more minutes. I took care of it during your presentation. But I just, first of all, want to say thank you for your life's work, B, for documenting all of this. And I know it's hard for some. I'll just say I didn't get the living potentials model immediately. The flipping the joy switch, fear to joy triangle model was more self-evident, more obvious to me when I first saw it for the very first time. It instantly resonated with me, and it's only happened a couple of times in my life. One of the first times I ever saw Nassim Harame's work, it just resonated as core truth to me. And I couldn't put my finger on it, but I knew he knew what he was talking about. And what I want to say to you is that I could instantly tell that I had been following this pattern of flipping the joy switch, as you put it, by being an innovator, by being a builder, by focusing on leadership. It was intuitive to me to break out of that pattern. I couldn't put my finger on it. I couldn't explain it. But as soon as you showed it, in those diagrams and in those charts and explained your life's work and passion, I instantly knew you knew what you were talking about. And I from that point, I just had to dive into understanding the living potentials model, because I know it's the energetic flow behind that whole thinking that you're bringing forth. And it's not often you get to bump into people with original thought and idea. There's a lot of remixing going on out in the world. And I really just want to thank you for all the thought and energy and manifestation that you put into bringing forth your life force energy into this. And I'd encourage anybody to just get curious about it, get involved in the Intentional Change Network and find out what is this and how do you apply it. I've had the pleasure of being able to apply it to some of the groups I'm working with, and it legitimately works. People, I see light bulbs going off regularly, and I'm just scratching the surface of it. So when we can inspire people and when we can light those light bulbs up, you know, it's just a huge service to all of us, but to everybody else. And so thank you so much for doing this work.
Thank you, Mark. I want to acknowledge back to the rest of you all that the living potentials model was inspired by a deep understanding of nature. But when I wrote the model, I was trying to figure out how in the heck to express it. And the person who helped me express it was a Lummi elder called Chataskatam Witchtalem. And I went to him because he was one of my colleagues, and I actually had the experience of feeding him algae and enzymes and bacteria and saving his life a few times, because he got off of like 11 drugs at the beginning. When I first met him, he was going to go down from diabetes and heart disease and all these problems. And his wife brought him to me, and she said, "What can you do? He's been told by the hospital that he's going to go home. He's got a very short period of time. He should prepare for his death because he's on 11 drugs. They can't stabilize him. He's probably going to be gone." And I said, "Well, I can't tell you to get off your drugs, but what I can do is I can give you algae and I can give you enzymes and I can give you bacteria, and you can watch what's happening in your body and you can choose to do whatever you need to do. You're going to die anyway, so what the heck?" I mean, that sounds pretty, but that's basically what I said. And he said, "You know what? I am, unless I do something. So we'll try it." And over the next few years, he ended up becoming one of the people who was invited at the church from the church at the Vatican, when one of the prior popes was doing a church council at the Vatican. He was the elder who was the only indigenous elder invited to the Council of the Churches. And he went there and he was standing there, and it was interesting at the time. I'm going into a dog trail, but he was standing on the platform, and out of all the other church heads of churches from around the world, everybody else was in white, tan, or black costumes, and he was the one in full color. He was the one in full regalia. He had his drum, and he was being drummed, and his wife was in the little piccolo. And I think it's a piccolo. It's a little tiny flute thing. And Canadian honkers flew overhead. And he said there were no animals in the Vatican. In the whole central area, there were no animals except flying in V formation, Canadian honkers. And he said it was so amazing. So when I was trying to figure out how to express what I had downloaded from nature, and I said, "How am I going to talk about this?" And I said, "How do I draw this? Do I draw it a seed of a plant that's growing? Do I draw it as an idea? How in the world do I talk about this?" And I said, "I got it from the uterus, like my belly. I got it because I was studying my babies and how they grew and how my body was adapting, and how my body knew after the baby was born." I said, when I left my baby and I went on a date and my baby got hurt at one point, My body knew it before I got phone calls. I absolutely knew in a heartbeat something was wrong. And I called home and I said, what's going on? And they said, your son just pulled a teapot over on him. He's at the hospital, he's getting burned. And I went, oh my God. So I sat with Skatem and I said, you know what? How am I going to do this? And he said, draw it as a spiral. I said, it is. And he said, draw it as a baby, because when you're first born, you have wisdom. So when I was talking about ancestors before, he said, listen to the ancestors and learn the natural ancestors, the knowledge that's out there. And that's what helped me draw the spiral so that I could explain it to humans who are living in a disoriented world that is not connected to Earth anymore. So it's important that we reconnect to what is in the Earth, to what our seasons, what our galaxies, what our world, our cosmos is. We are at the heart of this. So when I then came to Mark, I knew I'd get back to you eventually, but when I came to Mark and I brought in this living potentials model, I had already tested it in business. I actually went back through my life and I tested it in all the 40 different projects that I got good results in, because I've been working on this for a while. And I've done it over and over and over. And I checked all my old patterns against this model that I drew. And it made total sense. And then I said, how in the world am I going to apply this to technology and the chaos in the world we're going into? And he said, well, let's look at it. And thank heaven he'd studied from Nassim Harriman. He understood quantum physics. He understood, because in order for me to draw these diagrams, I've read 17 disciplines and studies and philosophies and tried to tie it all together. To draw that one little diagram about flipping the joy switch for my son, that was work. To turn that into one page, one diagram that he could navigate from, that was a lot of work. And so for Mark to look at the living potential, he says, I get it. I said, what do you mean you get it? And he says, I get it. I really get it. And I said, well, how does it work in business? I says, well, let me give you a diagram. And I showed him a diagram. And he says, oh my God, it goes this way and this way. And oh, wow, we can do that. Wow. And I was so honored, just like Eric. Eric's on the call. I just saw you show up, Eric. You heard me talking on one of these things and you got it. So do you want to say anything about, I don't know when you came in the call, but what we're doing here at Intentional Change Network, we're bringing the best of the best thinkers I know together, people who are willing to really stretch out, bring your bizarre knowledge and your information to the table, and let's help make it even bigger. Because that's you, Eric. You're thinking in dimensions that most people don't think in. And you don't have to talk about all those dimensions because we don't have enough time. But
okay, well, no, I missed the first half hour.
okay, I just talked about the living. Yeah.
I caught the rest of it, and the reason why I missed it is because I was out helping on a farm doing infrastructure work, but we had long conversations about nutrition, and it's so essential that we reconnect to what the source of what is nutrition and what's nutritive to us, because it ties into all of your graphics and everything. And as you were introducing the big spiral going from the left to the right across the page and talking about this, I thought to myself, yeah, but where's the food? And then you started talking about it because it's buried down in the center middle. I was like, oh, there's the food. And you went all through the food. And that our belly is the seawater that used to be our whole environment. We've turned ourselves inside out through the fabulous process of organization and development and so forth. And we're an integration of all of the experiences of all the species that have done that. And it's all tied into our DNA and part of our growth in the womb process and all of that. But the nutrition is where we source our resonant capacity with the mother that's comes from the mineral consciousness of the earth, pathwayed through all the recombinant ways that it's tied together the molecular biology of plants, and then also redigested through the foods like the goats that were out on the farm I was working at. And it's remarkable the difference between living food and dead food. Absolutely remarkable in how you feel, the energy level and the clarity of thought and so forth. So when you presented your triangle of where we showed the degenerative, generative, and regenerative, or degeneration, generation, and regeneration, I started seeing, the degeneration is nutritive, and the generation is unitive. And you have to see that those two words are using the same letters. They're just a reversal of each other. And the regeneration is communitive. How we recombine and rethink our understanding on everything. So first, through the degeneration, understand that's the soil processing and all the little things that make all of the elementals available for uptake to the plant. And it's biological, physical, but it's also electromagnetic, psychical, and mental realm energies. So you go from nutritive to unitive to communitive. And communitive is holistic processing also. And so a little bit farther on, you're talking about the Popol Bull, founding our concepts, laws, traditions, perspectives. You had a whole list of stuff. It was right on. And what I heard was founded on false precepts. And I thought, wow, that's curious, because precepts is like the opposite of perspex, which gives us perspective. And so I looked at your Gong's violence triangle and blew it out as a three-dimensional two pyramids put together, so that the triangle that you represented is the middle of two pyramids, two three-sided pyramids. Okay, when you do that, and imagine that is a representation of where we are in our belief system, right? That controls our nutritive and unitive and communitive bodies. The precept is at the forward point. The perspect is at the original point, where you can see through the triangle all the way to the whole structure. So the precept, the false precepts then, which leads to the concept of prestige, is a matter of preordaining what is here, what our options are, so that we are not looking for new perspectives, because everything's given to us, right? And this is true from every level, because the church likes to give us our spiritual teachings, not something for us to derive. I will just listen to that. And the state likes to give our mental teachings by framing, this is what's okay and this is what's not okay. And the corporations now flesh it all out by giving us, this is what you need for your body. So your physical, mental, and spiritual realms are all taken care of. Leaving your emotional realm sort of like in the dark. Okay, so, but I'll just wrap this up to say that when you look at it that way, right, with that taking that triangle and move it into a 5-dimensional double pyramid and see it as eyeballs looking at all the range of possibilities versus eyeballs looking into a point like there is no other possibility. This is just what it is. That's where they funneled us. And that's the definition of a cult. All the possibilities are here. This is what you are. There's no ability for original thought, and all of the richness of the individual soul expression that we all come in with, and all of the experiencing through all of the billions of eyeballs and billions of bodies that we are, to innovate with. So where's the communicative possibilities? Doesn't exist too easily. So the ability to shift from precept to percept is intention.